And then we started a series just last week called The Grown Up Table. Excited about this one. And what we're doing here in this series is really looking at some of the realities and being honest about what it looks like to go from kind of the kid table to the grown-up table. And sometimes how we kind of go back and forth, if we're honest. And the reality of that transition is moving from a place where I'm a kid, and it's okay that I'm a kid, and I'm going to talk about kid things, I'm going to think about kid things, and I'm going to have the responsibility of a kid, to a place of being a grown-up where I begin to really embrace the fullness of what God has for me, the responsibility, the privilege, the honor of what God has created me to do and to be and to become, and said we're just going to kind of dive in and have the conversation on what does that look like, and some of the realities of sometimes how scary it is to make that move, and sometimes we're kind of tempted to go backwards. Somebody in the lobby asked me after, they said, Ryan, do you ever feel like you can go from the grown-up table back to the kid table? And I was like, yep, I think that's how it certainly feels that way, right? So let's be honest about that and look at it. And what we've been doing is, what we started last week, if you missed the conversation, you can catch up online. But we looked at the story of Joseph, at least the beginning of it, and we looked at some of these realities, right? That Joseph, as a 17-year-old young man, God would give him kind of this dream or this vision of something that would happen out here in the future, right? And as a young man, what we find is that his story is an interesting one. What he did is he would kind of move towards that vision, hope that would play out. And I'm sure in his mind, just like in our minds, everybody, when they have a vision of the future or maybe have read God's word and how God could interact in our lives, all of us would kind of hope that the path would be clean and straight and straightforward and just kind of move right towards it. The reality is that's not how it worked in Joseph's life, and that is certainly not how that tends to work in our lives. And what we discovered is that Joseph was a sharp young man. He was kind of special in some ways. His dad would recognize some of that uniqueness of how God had wired him, showed him some favoritism. We walked through some of this. His brothers were jealous of him. They ended up selling him into slavery, right? He gets picked up and finds himself in Egypt. And pretty quickly after he gets sold there, kind of almost automatically, God is elevating him up into this new place of authority and responsibility. And where we left off last week, it feels like Joseph did kind of one of these. He kind of went down into the valley, and then, boy, he's kind of right back to where he started, and it feels like a beautiful bounce back from kind of a dip in his story where he had a low moment, but, boy, he's now back on the path. What we're going to see is this is not where the story ended. I would love to be able to stand up here and tell you that it was some happily ever after here on out. We're going to see that is not the case. In fact, Joseph's line is going to look something like kind of like this. Okay, it's going to look something that beautiful, right? It's going to be this fantastic journey we're going to see. And while like all of us, we would hope for the easy button, right? Kind of the easy path that is straight and clean. Joseph's story is going to look kind of like that. So we're going to dive into it, and what we're going to see today is there's a mindset to being a grown-up that we're going to discover as we look at Joseph's story, and I think we're going to walk away and see our own stories maybe in a little bit different light. So what we're going to dive in here today is Genesis chapter 39. So if you have a Bible, you can open to that page in chapter. If you don't have a Bible and you want one, you can grab one from underneath the chairs there right in front of you. Open that, use it today, and you can take it home with you. The people of Grace Church are gifting that to you. If you need a Bible, we would love for you to take that. And here's where we are. We're going to pick up in 39, starting in verse 6. And here's what Genesis tells us. It says, now Joseph was well-built and handsome, and after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. Okay, here we go, right? Jumping right in. What we see right away is Joseph's got some riz, right? As the kids say, That's right. If you don't know what Riz is, ask someone who's around you and younger. Right? Joseph is jacked. He's got some muscle. He's good looking. And this lady, evidently we got a cougar in the room, and she's going after him, man. And this is in the Bible, just so you know, right? So this is a Bible story that we're reading. And so Joseph is a younger man, right? We know he was 17 when he was sold into slavery, and so he's not that much older than that. And now he's got to kind of face off with this woman who is advancing aggressively towards him. And here's what he does, says, but he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. He says, everything he owns, he's entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. He says, my master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Then he said something profound. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? He says, and though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and he ran out of the house. Okay? Super interesting scenario that plays out here. Right? Joseph is right? He is loaded with responsibility. It's certainly, at first look, it seems like some of this dream that he had might be being fulfilled right here. Right? His dream was that his brothers and his sisters, even his mom and his dad, would bow down to him, and that he would be in some kind of leadership role down the street where evidently his life was being valued very highly and he was being used in a powerful way to bless and to help others. Maybe this is it, right? And so he's kind of at the top of his game. This woman shows up, the wife of his master, and now he's in this situation that we can imagine is probably tempting. And before we go any further, before we look deeper at kind of the mindset of all this, I want us to grab this principle because it's an important one. When we are faced with temptation, specifically sexual temptation, an incredible strategy to act on is the one that Joseph just employed here. And here's what he did. When faced with sexual temptation, what did Joseph do? He ran. Okay? That is a phenomenal strategy. When there's somebody who is getting close, you're starting to flirt at work, or maybe somebody's sending that private mail, old ex is reaching out on social media, and sort of, we don't warm up and cozy up to that. We don't continue. What you do is you run. Get out of that situation. That's exactly what he did. Right in the middle of the situation, he runs. Get away. Get out of Dodge. Right. Get out of that scenario. Run away from sexual temptation, because especially something like sex is so powerful. It grabs a hold of, right. Our bodies are involved, and sometimes, oftentimes, the best thing that we can do is run away. Get out of the scenario. Break out of the situation, and often clearer heads prevail. Great principle to grab hold of. And we don't know totally what was in Joseph's mind. We see by what he said that he recognizes that he's like, how am I going to sin against God, man? I mean, he is watching me. He is the one that I answer to. And we don't know if in the back of his mind he's thinking, hey, acting on this temptation and sinning against God is not the path to this dream getting fulfilled. Am I going to dismantle what God has told me and showed me and promised me to be with this woman? He's able to see through that and get out of Dodge. Now, this is usually the part in the story where we would think, man, Joseph he passed the test. He nailed it. This is probably where God's going to look at him and give him like everything he ever wanted, and all of his dreams are going to come true, and it's going to be beautiful, and easy is going to happen now, right? Isn't that how it works? Now, if you're like me, didn't grow up in church, and you're just learning this story, it can be a little bit shocking to see what happens next. That doesn't happen. God doesn't come in and give him everything he wants. In fact, it's the exact opposite scenario that plays out. Here's how the story unfolds. She goes and she crafts a different story. Further down, it says this: when she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us." Right? They're Egyptian. He's Hebrew, is why she's pointing this out. "He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She tells her husband about it. She said, "This is how your slave treated me." Her husband, he burned with anger appropriately. Joseph's master took him, put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And so Joseph, this is fascinating. Joseph, he does the right thing here. He does the right thing, and instead of God looking and saying, "Good job, man, you did the right thing in this heated moment. I'm gonna reward you or bless." None of that plays out. Joseph is in the midst of a bigger story. He's committed to doing right, kind of no matter where he finds himself on the line, right? He's in on doing right in light of living under the rule and the reign of God. But he finds himself now down into the prison. The Bible is going to call it the dungeon. Another translation would say the pit. This is where the prisoners go. And now he's back into disillusionment land. God, I served you. I was faithful to you. And now I find myself down here. How did this even happen? How does this even happen? And guys, this is important. Because if you're exploring your faith, or maybe you've been in church land a long time, there's this idea that if we kind of just do the right sets of things, that we're going to get this line. Nothing's ever going to fall apart or break down, and everything's going to be kind of easy, and God's going to take me to a place of where the promises, his promises are fulfilled, and the kind of the dreams come true, all of that. And the reality is this line is not actually how it works. Life in a fallen, broken world is always going to look a little bit more like this. It is messy. It is imperfect. There's a lot going on here. And we can find ourselves in a situation where it's confusing to know, have I left the path? Am I on the wrong part of it or not? Now, here's where we pick this story up. It says, but while Joseph was there in prison, right, the dungeon, the pit, the Lord was with him. I just want to pause there before we read anymore. I want you to hear that. I want to hear that. While Joseph was in prison, in the pit, in the dungeon, the Lord was with him. My circumstances are jacked up and broken, and the Lord is with me. When I get the diagnosis, when I lose the job, when everything feels like it's falling apart, when I'm at the bottom of the peak, I'm in the valley. This is where Joseph is. The Bible is telling us the Lord is still with you in the middle of all of that. When it feels like everything has fallen apart, God is still in it with me. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. He was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And as we read through the story, we're to feel like, man, this sounds familiar. And it's because just like what was happening here under Potiphar, it's happening now again. And Joseph is rising up. It's in the middle of a prison, so it's not that high. But he's being elevated here in the dungeon. Number one in the dungeon. Here we go. And now he's serving. He's being raised up. And what happens is, after a little bit of time, what plays out is this. Joseph is going to run into a few of the king's servants, right? The cupbearer and the baker, they get in trouble with the king, and the king's like, get in my dungeon, go down there. And so they're down there. They run into Joseph because he's in charge of everybody. And then they each have a dream, right? They've got to figure out what's going on with this dream. And they find out that Joseph interprets dreams. And so he interprets both of their dreams. The baker's dream is going to lead the baker to death, ultimately, right, to execution. The cupbearer, his dream is going to be a positive one. He's going to be restored to service. And Joseph's like, hey, man, you're going to be restored. By the way, when you get restored and you're back in the presence of the king, can you remember me since I helped you? It's a solid, legitimate ask, right, to make for somebody you just helped. The cupbearer gets restored. He gets back into the presence of the king. And guess what he does? Totally forgets about Joseph. Joseph has no idea what's happening, right? Because he's in the dungeon. And while he's got a minute where he thinks, maybe this is my chance, maybe the cupbearer is going to be the chance to connect me to power and to leadership, to get me out of this pit and dungeon. Here's what happens. The scripture tells us 2 years go by. Nothing. 2 years of dungeon and darkness and pit, serving the warden. Meanwhile, you've got to wonder, what was going on in Joseph's head right here? Did he remember the dream that he had when he was 17? Did he think, maybe I just made that up? It was a long time ago. That was another lifetime ago. God, are you done with me? Is this it for me? Is it too late for me? Is this all I'm going to amount to? Is this what you had in mind? The big man in the dungeon? I wonder what was going on for him in these moments. The Bible doesn't tell us, right? Sums it all up for us. The Bible doesn't tell us how he would have processed his own failings. The Bible paints a kind of a rosy picture of Joseph, which is appropriate. He's a man of great integrity, but certainly like you and I, he would have failed God in his heart or failed God at some point in his life. And maybe he even wondered, am I down here because I messed this thing up? Did I blow it, God, and you now that you dismantled and disqualified me from this dream, and now this is my new reality, and this is what I'm subjugated to. This is my life now. We don't know, okay? So Joseph's a human being like you and I. He's down there for a long time. I wonder what was playing out in his heart and his mind. And you and I get to see the story from the end, and we look back at it. Joseph's living it in real time. He doesn't know. He hasn't experienced, like you and I haven't experienced, that God, the God that he believes in and serves, is building a story in him. That he's taking him somewhere. That there's something that is happening within him along the way. We don't know that there's going to be a day that comes. This is huge. There's going to be a day that comes where the dungeon ends. That this doesn't last forever. Right? The low point that we're in the middle of isn't the forever. And here's the thing. The grown-up has to zoom out a little bit and see the bigger picture, to see the bigger thing that's going on. Right? At the grown-up table, we've got to fight hard to zoom out and to see that God might be doing something bigger than I can see in my moment. Right? In my little dot. Because here's how we live life. Right? Here's the day, and my day is terrible. There's this terrible thing going on. Here's all I can see. Am I going to be here forever? How long is this going to last? Can somebody fix this? Right? And we'll dial into the moment, and into the depth. And hear me, this is sometimes awful, okay? I'm positive that Joseph would be lonely and feel abandoned and probably had some really dark days, and we're allowed to have them too. Grown-ups have them, hear me. And we can't stay here. We have to fight and struggle to zoom out and to see that there's a bigger thing that's happening. Because here's what's going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. What we don't know is that there's going to be a day when Joseph's story is going to change, and that cupbearer that forgot about Joseph a few years later would be like, oh, hey, king, I forgot to tell you something. When the king has a bad dream and he's finding somebody to interpret for him and he can't find anybody, and the cupbearer's watching that play out, he's like, there is this one guy, I probably should have told you about him. I just left him in the dungeon instead. I forgot. Right? But there's this guy, Joseph, and he can interpret the dream. Let me pull him out of the dungeon. Right? And 41:14 says it this way. I'll just read it to you. I didn't put it in the notes. It says, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. He was brought out of the pit. In a moment, he was taken from this place of potential hopelessness and being broken down. And before he knew it, he was standing before a king. And before that king, he would interpret the dream. And here's where Pharaoh would land. It says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there's no one so discerning and wise as you. This guy was in a dungeon like 24 hours ago. He's like, you're the smartest guy in the whole kingdom. We didn't know it. You're a diamond in the rough. There's no one so discerning and as wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace. All of my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Joseph gets the ring of the Pharaoh and the robe of the Pharaoh, and he's paraded out in front of all of the people as like, that's the guy, listen to him. The guy in a dungeon just a few days before. Joseph we're going to see the story as it continues to unfold over the next few weeks. As Joseph becomes, he becomes the vision embodied. The vision he had, the dream he had at 17 comes to fruition much later. And all of a sudden now, he is where God told him he would be. He's living in the middle of it. Here's what I'm not sure Joseph would have totally put together. I don't think we totally put it together. We can see it in hindsight. Here's what's going on. Joseph isn't wasting time down here in the valleys and the dungeons. Here's what's going on. God is creating and he's making a man that can lead a nation. He's building him. Practice here in Potiphar's house. Practice here in the dungeon. If you can lead them, maybe you can prepare to lead the rest. Learn patience and trust in me. Withstand temptation in the midst of difficulty. And as you do that, now you're ready to be the king. You're ready to stand at the right hand and rule the nation. You weren't ready at 17. See, it's the childish view. It's okay. It's the childish view of life that wants it all and wants it now and wants it fast. It's the child that says, are we there yet? Right? It's the childish view that says, hey, I'm trying to get in shape. I went to the gym 7 times. Right? Why am I not in shape yet? It's the childish view of life that says, hey, why isn't my marriage been better? I've been kind to my spouse for 3 weeks now. How come it's not fixed? I've been in this job for 3 months. How come I'm not the boss already? Right? It's the childish view that says, I want it now, and I want it quick, and I want it easy, and I want it smooth. Folks, this line does not exist this side of heaven. If that is sad to you, I'm sorry. All of you who are hoping for an easy life, like maybe if I hit the lottery, or maybe if somebody just randomly chose to give me a bunch of money, I don't have to go to work tomorrow, how awesome would that be? Guess what? That's not going to happen. That won't be awesome. And even if it did happen, you probably aren't ready to steward it yet. God, here's the thing. God has purpose for you and me. I don't even know totally how this looks, but here's what I know. It's just like the life of Jesus, which, by the way, his life looked a version of this as well. Everybody's got a line like this. He was being formed even as the God-man. He had to walk through a version of this. The Bible says that he learned obedience by what he suffered. And the day before he became the king in the name above all names, he was on a cross. And he would look at you and I and say, follow me. Join me in my suffering that you might join me in my glory. This is what life following Jesus looks like. And here's the thing. He's making his man and his woman to embody the purpose that he has for you. You and I aren't ready for it yet. We're being formed into it. He's making us, and he's forming us. And guys, I don't always know why. I can't always explain all of the peaks and valleys because sometimes they're really dark, really long, and really low. But here's what I know. I look at Joseph's example. And what he does is he's like a farmer. He's just going to keep sowing and keep watering and keep tending. And if the storm comes and wipes it all out, he's going to start again and keep sowing and keep watering and keep farming in hope and belief that one day there's a harvest. See, this is how the grown-up views it. God, I want my life, I want my impact to matter. I want to become like you, and I know that means I got to go from where I am to where you would have me. And God uses these peaks and valleys and these long plateaus to build his people. He did it in the life of Joseph, and he'll do it in our lives. And contrary to how we feel, which often sounds like this, God, are you mad at me? Are you punishing me? Are you trying to destroy me? Are you against me? The answer is the exact opposite. I am for you. I'm working with you. I'm molding you. I'm helping you to engage and join the grown-up table. There's just no other way. There's no other way. And the Spirit of God works with the circumstances of life, and He turns us into something different. The kid with the dream wasn't ready to be the man carrying the nation. Guys, this is what's going on in your life and mine. If I had to reckon with this personally, this is the part that scares us the most. It's actually not failing. It's being used powerfully, mightily, wildly. Not for fame or success or notoriety or any of that garbage. That stuff gets beat out of you on the way. The desire for those things. God is looking at his children. He's saying, I want to make you into people that can carry a family. That can carry a friendship. That can carry a community. That can carry a church. This is what he's doing. He's building people that become more and more like the person of Jesus, that we might be a blessing to the people around us. Last service, I got to baptize Bill, and I don't know how old Bill is. He's close to 80. And Bill played his video, and he had tears in his eyes, and he talked about the joy that he has had in this last section of his life, after living a whole bunch of life. He's in this section. He would look and say, I can't believe how much joy I have today at what God is doing right among us right now. And you know what Bill would do? I asked Bill, do you want to make a video and share your story? Yes, I do. All right, Bill, let's go. Right? Do you know why? He wanted you to know and me to know. He wanted to share it. He wanted to be used, and he realized it's not about him. It's about Jesus and pointing to the person of Christ and living under the reign of God. And because I don't know where you are in this thing right now, right? Or what your line looks like. Here's what I know. That leading towards the grown-up table, zooming out and seeing this picture, takes an enormous amount of courage. Takes the mindset of a servant to say, I want my life to be used. I want God to use me, because guess what? After Joseph was the king, basically, right, the right hand of the king, his life didn't get easy. It was just the vision fulfilled. He was a blessing to the nation, and he saved his family, and he was used by God powerfully. Here's the question that the grown-up table makes me ask. Are you chasing the mindset of a child? I want it now. I want it easy. I want it free. Or have you adopted the mindset of a grown-up? It's going to take 10 times longer than I think it will. And it's probably going to hurt 10 times more. It's going to cost me deeply, and I'm going to change. But it's worth it. And I want to say thank you to my God who rescued me in Jesus, that I might be used by him in my life and have purpose in my days. That's what a grown-up sounds like. Guys, if I'm honest, I go from I have a bad day to there's a big picture, and I go back and forth. I bet you do too. But we help each other live here more and more. God is building his church. And he is glorified through all this. Can you imagine how it felt to be Joseph? Vindicated, restored. Can you imagine the tears in his eyes when he realized that faded dream came true? After all the ups and downs and the highs and lows and the waiting, God held his word and he fulfilled his promise and he used Joseph's life in a powerful way. Because what I believe is that you are here and I'm here in part to become grown-ups. Not to exist, not to check off a bunch of days, wait for retirement, survive. I believe that we are here to be used by God and to be used by him powerfully. The question is, am I willing to walk the line to see that play out? Will I allow God to form me into a man or a woman who can carry more than I ever could have thought, asked, or imagined? Will I let God work in me in those ways? As the band's going to come out, I'd love for us just to wrestle with this. Let it just sink in. Pray it through. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? Father, I still don't really get why you would entrust so much to the people that have failed you, that have rejected you at times, that have sinned against you. Lord, I don't understand why you would call us your children and include us in your family. And I certainly don't know why you would entrust us with your work to allow us to represent your name. God, thank you that you don't leave us the way that we are. Thank you, God, for that. Thank you, Lord, for molding us and making us and changing us as we seek you day in and day out. God, I pray that you would use the men and women in this room powerfully, that you would press us into the things that we're afraid of, that you would cause us to be far more than we ever would have imagined for ourselves, not for our own glory, but for yours, because there's a world to love and to reach and to bless, and you choose to do that through us. Move us, Lord. Don't allow us to be complacent or stale. Bless this world, this community, the people in this room. Meet us here, even now.